All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to How to Gain Admission to Stanford and Ivy League Universities. I'm Dan Lee, and I'm one of the co-founders and also a senior admissions consultant at Solomon Admissions Consulting. So at Solomon Admissions Consulting, we have the largest team of admissions officers in the industry. We have over 100 former college admissions officers, and we use a team-based approach to help you gain admission to the best school possible. And these people include people such as the former assistant director of admissions at MIT, the former director of admissions at Cornell University, the former senior associate director of admissions at the University of Pennsylvania, the former assistant director of admissions at Stanford University, and many, many other top admissions officers. So the first question to ask is why care? Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and Stanford reject over 60% of applicants who have both a perfect 4.0 unweighted GPA as well as a perfect 1600 on the SAT. And Stanford rejects 70% of students who have perfect SAT scores. So this table has three different columns. The first column shows the national average acceptance rate at top universities 19 years ago in 2005. The second column shows the national average acceptance rate at these schools last year. And the third column shows the acceptance rate of Solomon admissions clients who applied to these schools last year. And keep in mind that we are the only college admissions consulting firm whose success rates have been verified by a large Vault 50 independent accounting firm. And each of these schools represents schools where at least 15 Solomon admissions clients applied. So 19 years ago in 2005, the national average acceptance rate at Columbia University was 12%. Last year, the average acceptance rate at Columbia University was less than 1/3 of that at 3.9%. And last year, 31.6% of Solomon admissions clients who applied to Columbia University were admitted. 19 years ago in 2005, the acceptance rate at Stanford University was 13%. Last year, the acceptance rate at Stanford University was less than 1/3 of that at 3.6%. And last year, 32.4% of Solomon admissions clients who applied to Stanford University were admitted. So as you can see, by working with us, we can vastly increase your odds of admission at most of these top schools. So let's take a look at how elite colleges evaluate applicants. So elite colleges look at both your academic and your personal profile components. So roughly 25% is your SAT or your ACT score. Another 25% consists of your grades, your class rank, as well as your course rigor or difficulty. And for those of you who attend a high school that doesn't rank, keep in mind that colleges will know exactly where you're ranked. So your high school counselor submits what's called a school report to every college, and that report details items such as the lowest GPA in the graduating class, the highest GPA, and kind of the different distribution of grades within your class. And from that, college admissions officers can figure out exactly where you're ranked in your class. The other 50% consists of items that can be improved at the time that you apply. So roughly 25% is your personal statement, your supplemental essays, which have to be tailored to what every top school looks for. Our admissions officers can tell you what every top school looks for. So if you're applying to the University of Pennsylvania, what does UPenn look for? UPenn looks for students who take an interdisciplinary approach to academics, and you have to talk about that in your supplemental essays at Penn. If you're applying to Brown, what does Brown look for? Brown looks for students who want academic freedom through the open curriculum. You have to talk about that in your supplements at Brown University. And the addendum, which can be used to articulate any type of academic anomalies, whether it's in your grades or your testing. And the last 25% that we can help you out with consists of your activity sheet, your interviews, and your recommendation letters. So a question we get a lot is standardized testing on the SAT and ACT really optional at test optional colleges? And the answer is that it's not optional if you want to be a truly competitive applicant. So given two equivalent applicants, one with strong testing and the other without, the applicant with strong testing will look much more attractive. And keep in mind that a lot of your peers who submit strong testing will have a huge leg up on you in the admissions process. And so keep in mind that testing is definitely not optional if your GPA falls below the 25th percentile GPA for admitted applicants at a school. So if your GPA falls below the 25th, your SAT or ACT needs to be at the 75th percentile or above for admitted applicants at that school. And keep in mind that most top colleges that went top test optional are no longer test optional now. So the SAT and ACT are now required at schools such as Harvard, Stanford, Yale, MIT, Caltech, UPenn, Brown, Dartmouth, Cornell, and Georgetown. And that list is growing every year. So let's take a look at how does Stanford evaluate applicants. So when Stanford receives your application, the first thing they do is they recalculate your GPA. And so we have many former Stanford admissions officers who work at consultants at Solomon, and they'll all tell you that when Stanford receives your application, they will recalculate your GPA and look at your 10th and 11th grades only. And so we've worked with students who had a couple B's their freshman year, and they were still able to get into Stanford because they had all A's in 10th and 11th grade, and Stanford does not look at freshman year grades. They look at your academic core courses only. So if you have, so what they do is they look at your academic core courses in terms of foreign language, history, English, math, and science courses. They don't count things such as physical education, typing, band, and orchestra. Stanford also uses flat grading to recalculate your GPA. So what that means is if you have an A- on your transcript, that gets upgraded to an A, which is great if you have an A-. Conversely, if you have a B+ on your transcript, that actually gets downgraded to a B, which is not so great if you have a B+ on your transcript. So let's take a look at the Stanford applicant rating system. So Stanford assigns every applicant 6 separate ratings on a 1 to 5 scale, as well as an overall rating on a 1 to 5 scale. 1 is the highest, 5 is the lowest at Stanford. So Stanford assigns you an academic grades and GPA rating, 1 to 5, 1 being the highest, a testing rating 1 to 5, extracurricular rating 1 to 5. I've bolded the next one. This is the intellectual vitality rating at Stanford. This is the most important rating that Stanford looks at. And so I'll discuss what that entails later. But basically, this is a rating that they use a lot to weed out straight A students with perfect test scores who are not Stanford material. And they give you a recommendation letter rating and a self-presentation and essay rating as well. So let's take a look at the overall rating at Stanford. So Stanford assigns every applicant an overall rating on a 1 to 5 scale using a plus or minus system. So obviously a 2+ is better than a 2-, 1 being the highest, 5 being the lowest. If you have an overall rating of 1 at Stanford, that is extremely rare. It applies to less than 2% of the applicant pool at Stanford. And these are oftentimes students who have an intellectual vitality rating of 1, which is the highest. And so a rating of 1 means you're a clear admit. Like I said, these applicants to Stanford are extremely rare. You want to shoot for an overall rating of 2, and so the overall rating of 2 means you're competitive and well within the range to be admitted. This is roughly 10% of the applicant pool at Stanford. It means that you're compelling and you'll be given serious consideration by the admissions committee. We tell most of our applicants that you want to have an overall rating of 2 at Stanford, which means you're not a clear admit, but you are very, very competitive and you're being seriously considered. An overall rating of 3 is where most straight A students with perfect test scores fall. It means that you fall short of being compelling and you're much less likely to be admitted. And so an overall rating of 3 is, like I said, it's the zone where most straight A students with perfect test scores and a lot of extracurricular activities fall. An overall rating of 4 and 5 means that you're simply not competitive and that you're most likely not going to be admitted to Stanford. So let's take a look at the most common profile of a rejected Stanford applicant. So the rejected Stanford applicant has an academic grades and GPA rating of 2 to 3. What this means is they've taken most of the AP courses or honors courses offered at their high school. They've gotten almost all A's, maybe 1 or 2 B's. They have a testing rating of 1 to 2. What this means is they've scored in the 99th percentile most likely on the SAT or ACT. They have an extracurricular rating of 3 to 4. I'll go into what that means later, but basically an extracurricular rating of 3 to 4 means that the student is well-rounded extracurricularly. They do a lot of activities, they do them well, but they're not the best at one thing. They have an intellectual vitality rating of 3 to 4, and I'll go into what that entails a little bit later. A recommendation letter rating of 3 to 4, and a self-presentation essay rating of 2 to 3 for an overall rating of 3. Let's take a look at the most common profile of an admitted Stanford applicant. This is somebody who has an academic grades and GPA rating of 1 to 2. What this means is they've taken every AP honors and honors course that their high school offers, and they've gotten A's in all of their courses. They have a testing rating of 1 to 2. So the admitted student and the rejected student have the same testing rating. They both most likely scored in the 99th percentile on the SAT or ACT. They have an extracurricular rating of 1 to 3, which is much higher. What this means is the admitted student at Stanford is highly angular extracurricularly. They are the best at one thing. They are not well-rounded. They have an intellectual vitality rating that's much higher, 1 to 3. I'll go into what that means later. They have a recommendation letter rating of 2 to 3 and a self-presentation essay rating of 1 to 2 for an overall rating of 1 to 2. So let's take a look at the intellectual vitality rating. This is the most important rating at Stanford. The intellectual vitality rating of 1, which is the highest at Stanford. This means that the student has done independent academic research outside the classroom with a college professor, leading to a published research in a journal. This is a student who's potentially done substantial work on founding and developing a nonprofit related to their area of academic passion. They would have written a very strong Stanford intellectual vitality supplemental essay. And this student really shows a true love of learning for the sake of learning at a high level outside the classroom. So keep in mind, the intellectual vitality rating has nothing to do with your grades and test scores. You can have a 4.0 unweighted GPA taking every AP course your high school offers and a 1600 on the SAT, and you can still score really low on the intellectual vitality rating if you don't have these other elements. So when Stanford is looking at intellectual vitality, they're really asking a couple questions. Number one, does the applicant take ownership of their education outside the classroom? Is the applicant the kind of students who would enrich the learning of other Stanford students? And is this student passionate about learning? So let's take a look at the intellectual vitality supplemental essay prompt at Stanford. So every year they have an intellectual vitality supplemental essay. The prompt is, the Stanford community is deeply curious and driven to learn in and out of the classroom. Reflect on an idea or experience that makes you genuinely excited about learning, 250 words. So I call this the never-ending dinner conversation essay. Stanford really uses this essay to weed out perfect students who are not intellectuals and who get perfect grades and test scores for the sake of getting into Stanford and getting a high-paying job, not because they love learning. And so this question is really testing whether you love learning for the sake of learning or for the sake of getting into Stanford. A bad answer to this question is one, for instance, that talks about Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States, which many applicants use to study for the AP US History exam. So once again, Stanford is not looking for students who study for the sake of getting perfect grades and test scores. And so a great answer to this question addresses one intellectual idea that reveals your love of learning outside the classroom, and that can also be translated to undergraduate research and academic publication at Stanford, and is hopefully related to your future major and your career goals. So let's take a look at some of the differences between Stanford and the Ivies. So unlike the Ivies, Stanford tends to admit the most compelling applicant, not necessarily the most qualified applicant on paper. So we have a lot of students every year who get into Stanford and Harvard. The difference between them is pretty clear. The student who gets into Harvard is a finished product on paper. This is somebody who looks incredibly impressive on paper in terms of accomplishments and awards. Oftentimes the students who get into Stanford are students who have a lot of potential, but they're not necessarily the finished product on paper. Stanford also weighs the SAT a little bit less than the Ivies. They weigh the supplemental essays quite a bit more heavily than the Ivies. They also weigh athletic recruiting more heavily. I believe about 1/4 of the incoming class at Stanford is recruited athletes. They assign applicants a separate intellectual vitality rating, which we discussed, and Stanford does not give as big a boost to early action applicants as a lot of the Ivies do. And Stanford also tends to favor public school students over private. So how do Ivy League schools evaluate applicants? So obviously there are 8 different Ivies. They have varying rating systems. And so we're going to use Dartmouth College as an example. So at Dartmouth, everyone is assigned a 1 to 5 rating, one being the lowest, 5 being the highest. And so everyone is assigned 2 main ratings, an academic rating 1 to 5, 5 being the highest, and a extracurricular personal rating 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest. They also give you 5 sub ratings. So the first sub rating is a grades and GPA rating 1 to 5, a testing rating 1 to 5, an intellectual qualities rating 1 to 5, and the intellectual qualities rating at Dartmouth is very similar to the intellectual vitality rating at Stanford. And they also give you sub-ratings for extracurricular rating 1 to 5, as well as a personal qualities rating 1 to 5. So let's take a look at what an academic rating of 5 out of 5, which is the highest at Dartmouth, looks like. So this is someone in the top 1 to 2% of their high school class. They would have taken every AP course their high school offers. They would have scored in the 99th percentile on the SAT or ACT. They would have glowing letters of recommendation indicating that the student is the best applicant from the past several years from his, her, or their high school. They would show an intense love of learning, often evidenced by academic research outside the classroom with a college professor, as well as publication in a journal. And this is someone who has the potential to be a leader in their future academic field. So let's take a look at what an academic rating of 3 out of 5 at Dartmouth looks like. So this is someone who's most likely not going to be admitted. This is someone in the top 5 to 10% of their high school class. They would have taken most of the AP courses their high school offers. They would have scored in the 95th percentile or above on the SAT or ACT. They would have strong but unexceptional letters of recommendation. And this student is really driven more by competition than by true love of learning. And they may have done some independent readings outside the classroom, possibly a little bit of research, but no published research with a college professor. Let's take a look at what a extracurricular personal rating of 5 out of 5, which is the highest at Dartmouth, looks like. These are all independent examples of 5s. And so as you can see, these students are not well-rounded extracurricularly. These students are highly angular, and they're the best at one thing. So examples include a published author, a Regeneron STS finalist, which is the top 40 in the country for doing STEM research, an Olympic medalist, a soloist at Carnegie Hall, someone who's qualified for the USMO, someone who has awards at the national level, and someone who has a patent pending, obviously without parental involvement. Let's take a look at what an extracurricular personal rating of 3 out of 5 at Dartmouth looks like. So this is somebody who's most likely not going to be admitted to Dartmouth or to any Ivy League college. They have awards at the regional level. They have significant commitment at a high level to a few activities. Examples include student body president, all-state orchestra, captain of a varsity sports team, a nationally ranked debater. This student is well-rounded and involved, but not the most passionate about anything. So I call the student the jack of all trades, the master of none. If you are well-rounded extracurricularly, you're going to have a very hard time getting into Dartmouth or into any Ivy League school. So for those of you who are interested in engineering, keep in mind that there's a separate engineering admissions process at Columbia, Cornell, and UPenn. And so what this means is that engineering faculty are on the admissions committee. And as you can probably guess, engineering faculty really like numbers. And so there's a greater emphasis on grades and test scores, especially test scores in STEM subjects. And there's also a greater emphasis on academic research in engineering, as well as engineering internships. And keep in mind that everything else being equal, a female applicant to engineering at the Ivies is about twice as likely to be admitted as an equally qualified male applicant. So a question we get a lot is, should I apply early decision or early action by the November 1st deadline? The answer is unequivocally yes, and I'll go into the reasons why. So most Ivy League and other top universities fill approximately 50% or half the available seats in their incoming freshman class through ED or EA, and the deadline for most ED/EA programs is November 1st. The academic advantage conferred by applying early decision or early action is the academic equivalent of adding about 100 points to your SAT score. Early decision and early action applicants at schools not named Harvard, Stanford, Yale, and Princeton compete against a much weaker applicant pool. So what do I mean by that? The strongest students in the country tend to apply restrictive early action to Harvard. And so if you're applying, for example, early decision to Duke, the early decision pool at Duke is much weaker than the regular decision pool at Duke. And the reason for that is if you're applying ED to Duke, you're not competing against the students applying REA to Harvard, REA to Stanford, REA to Yale, REA to Princeton, ED to Columbia, ED to UPenn, etc. And so a lot of the strongest students in the country are not competing directly against you at a school like Duke if you apply early decision. Your application is read much more closely since there's more time to devote to each application. And borderline applicants who are waitlisted regular decision at a school would have been admitted had they applied early decision or early action to that school in most cases. So this chart has 3 different columns. The first column shows the early decision acceptance rate, the early decision or early action acceptance rate at Ivy League schools last year. The second column shows the regular decision acceptance rate at these schools. And the third column shows the percent of the freshman class filled through binding ED or non-binding EA. And so, for example, last year, the early decision acceptance rate at Brown University was 14.4%. The regular decision acceptance rate at Brown was less than 1/3 of that at 4.1%. And Brown filled 52% of their incoming freshman class through binding early decision. Last year, the early action acceptance rate at Yale was 9%. The regular decision acceptance rate at Yale was almost 1/3 of that at 3.1%. And it's unclear what percent of the freshman class Yale filled through restrictive early action because of the fact that it's non-binding. Let's talk about strategic positioning and crafting one's narrative. So what is strategic positioning? Strategic positioning is simply positioning your strengths against an institution's weaknesses for the purpose of making you stand out. So for those of you who are fans of tennis, if you ever watched Federer play Nadal, what Nadal will do strategically is he'll set up the point so that the ball goes from his lefty forehand to Federer's weaker one-handed backhand. He'll pit his strength against Federer's weakness for the purpose of breaking down his backhand and winning the point. So in the college admission sense, you want to pit your strength against a school's weakness. So a very clear example of that is that it's much more advantageous for a student who's an engineering whiz with a lot of science awards to market this strong engineering background at Yale, where not that many strong engineering majors apply, versus marketing it to MIT, where he would be a dime a dozen and blend into the crowd. So let's talk about strategic positioning and building a class. So admissions committees or AdComs are building a class. Top colleges are looking to build a well-rounded incoming class composed of students who are not well-rounded. So let me say that one more time. Top colleges are looking to build a well-rounded incoming class composed of students who are not well-rounded. So the key question is, who are you going to be in the incoming class? What talent or perspective do you bring to the incoming class that no one else brings? And do you have the potential to be a future leader in your chosen academic field? So let's take a look at a very simplistic example of strategic positioning. So most clients we work with at Solomon, when they come to us, they are well-rounded extracurricularly. Admissions committees at the top schools don't like admitting well-rounded students. They want students who are angular, who are very, very good at one or two areas. And so the strategy is to simply center your personal statement on a singular passion or intellectual pursuit that makes you seem a bit more focused and angular than you actually are. So think of your high school career as 300 hours of footage that you're shooting for a 2-hour movie. Depending on how you splice that footage down, you can either make yourself look well-rounded or angular, and you want to do the latter. So let's take a look at some common case studies. These are all case studies of clients that Solomon Admissions has worked with in the past. We're going to look at the case studies, see what we did to help the student and what the outcome was. So case study number 1 is the undeclared major applicant. We work with a lot of students who have no idea what they want to study in college, but every top college asks you in the application, what do you want to study and why? And I don't know is simply not a compelling answer. So this student came to us junior year. He was a white male applicant from a public high school. He had a 3.7 GPA, taking a very light course load. He had only taken one AP course his first 3 years of high school. He had a 33 on the ACT, and he was an avid thespian, and he had no extracurricular activities outside of theater, and he was completely undecided on his major. So the strategy we use is that we help the student discover his interest in linguistics through theater. Linguistics is a undersubscribed major at every top school. If you have a strong background in linguistics, you're much more likely to be admitted. And so we help the student find a research opportunity with a linguistics professor over the summer. He ended up doing research with this professor, and he ended up getting published that summer. We also suggested that the student found a nonprofit to show leadership and initiative. He did that at a very, very high level. And we also had the student submit a theater supplement for the application, which is considered extra credit at pretty much every school. And the outcome is that he was admitted at the University of Chicago, Georgetown, and NYU. And keep in mind that UChicago and Georgetown rarely ever accept students who are white males who are unhooked with a 3.7 and a 33 ACT. Let's look at case study number 2. This is the recruited athlete. So this student came to us senior year. She was a white female applicant from a private high school. She had a 3.6 GPA, 1380 on the SAT. She was a talented track runner, and she was recruited by several Division I schools. And she was well-rounded extracurricularly and had no idea what she wanted to study. And so originally, the student wanted to write her application about sports and being undecided on her major. We vetoed both of those things. So if you're a recruited athlete and you're applying to top colleges, they know that you're good at sports, so they do not want you to talk about sports in the application. They want to know what else you bring to the class outside of sports. So what we advised is that she write her entire application about her leadership pursuit, as well as her interest in mathematics and physics, to showcase what she would bring to campus outside of sports. And we positioned her as a physics major, since women are underrepresented in physics, and she had very strong grades in her math and her physics courses. And so the outcome is that she was admitted early at the College of William and Mary, and she ended up running on the track team there. So let's take a look at case study number 3. This is the student with no extracurricular activities. We work with a lot of students who come to us who have no extracurricular activities. That's typically disqualifying at every top school, even with great grades and testing. And so this student came to us senior year, so there was not even a chance to suggest activities for her to do because she had to apply immediately. She was a white female applicant from a public high school. She had a 3.9 GPA, taking a very light course load. She had only taken 2 AP courses her first 3 years of high school. She had a 30 on the ACT, which is very low. And she had no extracurricular activities. She simply spent her summers vacationing in Europe and visiting museums and shows in Paris and London. And so the strategy we use is we use her interest in art through visiting famous art galleries, and we positioned her as an art history major. Art history is a undersubscribed major at every top university, and if you have a strong interest and background in art history, you're much more likely to be admitted. So the application talked about the different pieces of art that she had seen around the world and how that would translate to her major in art history. The outcome is that she was admitted at both USC and NYU. And keep in mind that USC routinely rejects students with higher grades, higher ACT scores, and who have a lot of extracurricular activities. Let's look at some major specific case studies. So case study number 1 is the pre-med applicant. We work with a lot of students who want to be doctors, and there are many pitfalls to this applicant. So there are too many college applicants who are pre-med, and once again, colleges want a diversity of academic interests in their incoming freshman class. They don't want an entire freshman class filled with future doctors. So this student tends to have a very generic extracurricular profile. They would have done medical research at a university for a summer. They would have volunteered in the ER at the hospital, and they would have your standard medical, volunteer, and clinical experiences. And we always tell students, you're not applying to medical school. You're applying to a 4-year, in most cases, a 4-year liberal arts college. And so no one cares why you want to be a doctor. So don't talk about it in your application. So let's look at a case study of a pre-med applicant we work with. This student came to us junior year. She was an Asian female from a highly ranked and hyper-competitive public high school. She had a perfect 4.0 GPA, taking the most rigorous AP courses. She had a 1540 SAT. She had done medical research at a university for 1 summer, but she had no publications or awards. She did science Olympiad. She was a hospital volunteer. She did varsity cross country. She was actually very good at drawing, and we had her submit an art supplement. And she had a few smaller leadership positions, and she really wanted to major in human biology at Stanford. So the strategy we use is, obviously, human biology is the most oversubscribed pre-med major at Stanford, and Asian females are highly overrepresented in the pre-med arena. So what we did is we removed the hospital volunteering experience from our activity sheet. Instead, we positioned her as an art history major. Once again, art history is an undersubscribed major at every top school. And this student had perfect grades in our art and our history courses. We also had her submit a very strong art supplement, which we reviewed and critiqued. And we also had her do an independent research paper on art history. She published the paper, and she ended up being admitted to Stanford as a art history applicant. And once you're admitted to Stanford, like most top schools, you can declare any major you want. So she simply declared human biology as her major. Let's look at case study number 2. This is the computer science / engineering applicant. We work with a lot of students who are interested in computer science, and once again, computer science is one of the most oversubscribed, if not the most oversubscribed major at most top schools. And so there are too many applicants who want to study computer science, and once again, colleges don't want an entire freshman class filled with computer science majors. And so this student tends to have a generic extracurricular profile as well. They would have done robotics, girls who code. They would have taken AP computer science. They would have interned at their parents' tech company. They would have self-taught themselves multiple programming languages and possibly created an app for the smartphone. And this is especially bad positioning for the most overrepresented students in this field. And who are those students? Those students are East Asian and South Asian male applicants. So let's take a look at a case study of a computer science student we work with. So this student came to us junior year. He was an Indian male from a top boarding school. He had all A's taking the most rigorous AP courses with only 2 B's. He had a 35 on the ACT. He did robotics club. He had a 5 on the AP computer science exam. He self-taught himself multiple programming languages, including assembly and Python. He did tennis, chess club, speech and debate. We had him do an independent research project in linguistics. And he had no research or major awards for computer science, and he went to major in computer science at Harvard. So this profile for a Indian male applicant for computer science is considered to be an average to below average profile for computer science. And so the strategy we use is obviously Indian males are the most overrepresented group in computer science and face the highest bar for admission. And so what we did is he had a very strong interest in languages. So we set the student up with a research opportunity with a computational linguistics professor. For those of you who are not familiar with computational linguistics, it's an area of linguistics where you can apply your computer science background to the study of language. And so he did research with this professor, and he wrote his entire application about his interest in linguistics and philosophy. The outcome is that he was admitted at Harvard and Cornell. And once you're admitted, you can declare any major you want. So he simply declared computer science as his major. Let's look at case study number 3. So this is the business / economics applicant. We work with a lot of students who want to study business or economics, and keep in mind that most top colleges do not have an undergraduate business major. So if you apply to Harvard, there's no undergrad business major. Yale, no undergrad business major. Princeton, no undergrad business major. Stanford, no undergrad business major. Columbia, no undergrad business major. And so the list goes on and on. And so you can't even talk about your interest in business at most top schools because that's not a major that you can study. And keep in mind, admissions officers don't want to read an application about a student who wants to study economics or business, get an investment banking job on Wall Street and make a lot of money. That's not a winning application that they like. And I always tell students, you're not applying to an MBA program, you're applying to a 4-year liberal arts education. Do not discuss your interest in investment banking or private equity in the application. So let's take a look at a case study of a business / economics applicant we work with. This student came to us junior year. He was an Indian male from a private high school. He had all A's taking the most rigorous AP courses. He had a 1560 on the SAT. He was a nationally ranked policy debater. He was an Eagle Scout. And he had no business experience, and he wanted to apply to the dual Jerome Fisher M&T or Management and Technology program at UPenn Wharton. And the M&T program is the most selective dual program at Wharton, and it allows you to get a dual degree between the Wharton School of Business as well as Penn Engineering. And he wanted to work in private equity on Wall Street. And so the strategy we use is that the M&T program at Penn really looks for 3 things. Number 1, they look for students who have a strong quantitative background. When this student came to us, he had a strong quantitative background. The second thing they look for is they look for students who take an interdisciplinary approach to academics. And the reason for that is if you're a student at Wharton, you are encouraged to take classes in the other 3 schools at Penn, those other 3 schools being arts and science, engineering, and nursing. And so they're actively looking for students who take an interdisciplinary approach to academics and business. And so when he came to us, he had not done really anything that was interdisciplinary. And the third thing they look for is students who have done something entrepreneurial, not necessarily starting their own business, but they want people who've done something that's entrepreneurial in terms of character. And so he also had not done anything entrepreneurial when he came to us. And so what we did is we set this student up with a research opportunity with an industrial engineering and operations research professor. For those of you who are not familiar with industrial engineering is a highly interdisciplinary area of engineering that combines statistics, math, engineering, and business and the humanities. And so he was able to check the interdisciplinary box through doing this research. And instead of talking about his interest in private equity and investment banking in the application, we told him to talk about wanting to combine his public policy experience through debate with his quantitative background to start a public policy think tank in DC that uses big data to analyze public policy issues, which show that he's entrepreneurial. The outcome is that he was admitted at M&T, and once you're admitted, you can apply for any type of job you want. So he's now applying for private equity and investment banking jobs on Wall Street. Let's look at case study number 4. This is the combined BSMD applicant. So we work with a lot of students who want to apply to 6, 7, and 8-year combined BSMD programs. For those of you who are not familiar, these are BSMD programs are programs where you are admitted to medical school straight out of high school. And so there are many pitfalls of this applicant. Once again, colleges want a diversity of incoming interests, of academic interests in their incoming freshman class. They don't want an entire freshman class filled with future doctors. And we get a lot of students into Premed at Brown, which is the program in liberal medical education. And so to be admitted to Premed, you have to be admitted to both Brown undergrad and to the Alpert School of Medicine at Brown. So what does Brown undergrad look for in pre-meds? They look for pre-meds who want academic freedom through the open curriculum, who want to combine their pre-medical studies with areas like anthropology, linguistics, etc. And what does the Alpert School of Medicine at Brown look for? The Alpert School of Medicine at Brown looks for students who have a compelling mission in medicine and who have the requisite research, clinical, and volunteer experiences to back up that compelling mission. And so you have to market yourself differently for non-BSMD programs. So if you're applying to Stanford, don't talk about wanting to be a doctor, versus BSMD programs where you have to talk about why you want to be a doctor. But you have to not only talk about why you want to be a doctor, you have to distinguish yourself from other students who also want to be doctors. So let's take a look at a case study of a combined BSMD applicant we work with. This student came to us senior year. She was an Asian female from a public high school. She had a perfect 4.0 GPA, taking the most rigorous AP courses. She had a lot of 3s and 4s on her AP exams, which wasn't great. She had a 34 on the ACT, and she had national awards for research on environmental issues. And she founded clubs promoting an interest in STEM and conservation. She was also a hospital volunteer, and she wanted to apply to Stanford, Harvard, Yale, and Premed at Brown. And so the strategy we used a bifurcated strategy. So at the top, for Stanford, Harvard, and Yale, what we did is we removed the hospital volunteering experience from our activity sheet. Instead, we marketed this student as an environmental engineering major. Since everything else being equal, female applicants to engineering at the Ivies are twice as likely to be admitted as equally qualified male applicants. And so her application at Harvard, Stanford, and Yale talked about her interest in conservation and her interest in environmental engineering. So, and then for Premed at Brown, you have to talk about why you want to be a doctor, but you have to distinguish yourself from other students who also want to be doctors. So this student had shadowed a lot of doctors in rural areas, and every medical school is looking for doctors who want to practice in rural areas such as North Dakota, Alaska, etc. And the reason for that is there's a shortage of physicians in those areas. And so she talked about her interest in becoming a country doctor. The outcome is that she was admitted to Premed as well as Harvard, Stanford, and Yale. And if you're interested where she ended up going, she decided to go to Stanford, and she actually decided not to be a doctor. So I've talked a lot about research in this presentation. So I want to give you an overview of the Solomon Research Scholars Program. The Solomon Research Scholars Program is a 10-week online high school research program, completely remote, where students write a 15-page research paper at the end of the 10 weeks on a specific topic within a field of interest. Or you will be paired with a research mentor who's a current PhD candidate or student at a top university, and they come from over 40 different academic disciplines. So you will meet with your research mentor 1 hour a week, each week for 10 straight weeks. And this program is open to 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th graders. The time commitment is about 60 hours to do research and writing over the process of 10 weeks. and no prior research experience is required. And once again, you're paired with a PhD research mentor based on your interest in a specific academic field. So there are several benefits to doing a program like this. So number one, it raises your intellectual vitality rating at the top colleges. I've talked about the intellectual vitality rating extensively. It has nothing to do with your grades and test scores, and it's maxed out by showing a level of learning outside the classroom, whether it be doing independent research projects or doing a research project with a PhD student or a candidate. And like I said, the vast majority of students who are rejected by top schools have perfect grades and test scores, but very low intellectual vitality. And so this will be the first exposure to research for a lot of students, and this may give you an idea of the type of research you would want to do as an undergraduate in college. And it also allows you to explore a field of study that you're interested in studying. So at Solomon Admissions Consulting, we provide comprehensive college admissions counseling services from the largest team in the industry of over 100 former admissions officers. We work with students as early as 5th, 6th, and 7th grade up till high school as well as senior year of college. A lot of the students we work with come to us senior year, and we're still able to greatly increase their odds of admission at the top schools. We help you on everything from A to Z, everything from the personal statement to prepping for the interview, etc. Here's a sample of some of our acceptance letters from our students. Whenever our students get admitted to schools, we ask them for their acceptance letters. Obviously, we redact their name and their address for confidentiality purposes. But here's a sampling of our letters, and you can see more letters on our website. So with that said, if you have further questions, I highly recommend that you call us or email us at info@solomonadmissions.com. We offer a free 20-minute consultation with one of our admission strategists. And during this 20-minute consultation, they will take you through the strengths of your application, the weaknesses, as well as what we can do to help you become a stronger applicant at your top choice schools. And so you can set that up by either calling or emailing us. And I highly recommend that you set that up simply because even if you decide not to use our service, it's a great way to get feedback on your profile.